Do you believe that the coronavirus and the China slowdown, to Michael's point, has any risk of creating a global or U.S. or Asian recession?
I think the likelihood is greater in Asia. You were talking about Japan, Korea. We also have to think about Singapore and all the smaller countries, Malaysia, Thailand, and so on, that are quite vulnerable to China. So I think there's a higher risk there than there is in the United States. Germany, as you know, is dependent on autos and machinery. China's the biggest auto market. And the Germans have political instability right now, as well as haven't benefited at all from negative interest rates. I can't find anybody, by the way, that has benefited from negative interest rates in terms of the real economy, and certainly not the banking sector. Again, as was pointed out, I think in one of the points made just now in that dialogue, or that trialogue or quadrilogue, you all were talking at once.
Quintilogue was fabulous.
Is that money is relative. Where's money going to go? And I've said this a million times on this show and on Squawk Box and others. You have to consider the relativity of an economy, and we are the best-looking horse, if not in the glue factory, on the racetrack.
Let me ask it more directly, Richard. If China's GDP goes to 0% in the first quarter, or 1%, whatever the number ultimately is, does that hit our GDP in the United States, and if so, by how much?
Yeah, probably. I don't know how much. Remember, arguably on a purchasing power basis, China's about 25% of the global economy, or somewhere between 15 and 25%. That's significant. So, again, it's a knock-on effect. What happens elsewhere will affect us, but I'm not sure it's that dramatic unless this coronavirus spreads here. And we just had another case announced in one of the air bases in Texas where people have been quarantined. We'll have to see what happens here and how it spreads through the rest of the global economy, and if that is serious enough to slow us down. I don't know the answer to this question. I will tell you this. I was recently in England and to go to an academic ceremony. The son of a major Chinese political figure was at this university. The father and I and the sons had dinner, and he told me that at the very beginning of this, that as far as what China was reporting, his own government, and he's a senior official, you had to have add two zeros to the numbers they were reporting. I would say now you have to add at least 1 zero. So this isn't over. I don't think it's going to go away. They're reporting under new examination standards. But we know that the data we get from China often is not correct. And to hear a senior member of the Central Committee say that you had to add 2 zeros back then and 1 zero now is a pretty serious thing.
It is, and I want to be very careful. Jim, I'll let you get in a second, but I want to be very careful with what you're saying, though, Richard, because, again, this is just somebody's sort of offhand comment, whether or not it's true or not, because you're talking about 59,000 confirmed cases now in China. You're talking about adding a zero. That's 590,000. I mean, we got to be very careful because it's just speculation.
I was saying that, what I was saying, you probably only could add a zero now. Back then, he was correct. Add 2 zeros. This is a senior political figure in the inner circle of the Chinese government. So that was then. This is now. We'll see.
Mr. Fisher, it's Jim Leventhal.
But again, we all speculate about the coronavirus. I think none of us have really any great insight, and
that's right.
I certainly don't. So I may be able to have some insight as to the Fed, but this is all speculation at this juncture. Speaking
to your insight to the Fed, look, we've had these repo operations going on for quite some time. I don't care what it's labeled. I frankly think it's been very positive for the stock market, for the financial markets overall, regardless of what's going on with the coronavirus. Do you see or anticipate any near-term end to those operations, which by extension would be negative for the markets?
No, I think they're going to have to provide that liquidity in the marketplace. They may create a totally standalone facility. There's some talk about that. I noticed my successor, Rob Kaplan, has made that front and center. So, no, I don't see that ceasing because it's required. And indeed, the balance sheet is back up to $4.2 trillion or close to $4.2 trillion. By the way, I didn't hear anything that was at all newsworthy, which I consider good, from Powell's congressional testimony.
I want to talk about the Fed very quickly to wrap it up, Richard, which is Judy Shelton, obviously Trump's nominee.
Right.
You've got some big-name Republicans that have expressed concern that she has sort of been almost anti-Fed, return to the gold standard. Do you think that she makes it through?
Well, Senator Toomey is pretty outspoken about her, and if you have every Democrat vote against her on the committee and one Republican go against her, then she can't be advanced, as I understand it, for confirmation. I think she fell victim to speaking too much, and it appears that she has some political instincts. I don't have any problem with the research director from St. Louis, absolute first-rate guy. That's the kind of person that fits in well to that governorship structure. But I think it's going to be tough on her. Now, I don't mind having differences of opinion at the Board of Governors. It's very rare for a governor to dissent, and if you go back and look, it almost never happens. It happened under Paul Volcker. He ends up exerting his authority and wins. So we'll have to see. From everything I've read about her, from I've heard about her, she doesn't quite fit into the culture. And the most important thing is this business about independence. And if you're going to be sharing FOMC discussions with the White House on, that does not work and is verboten and should never happen. So we'll see. We'll have to see.
We are going to see. Could become the fifth Trump pick to not make it through onto the Federal Reserve. Richard Fisher. Richard, thank you very much. Always a pleasure to get your time. Wide range of topics. Thank you very much.